Hey, Teddy K here for the Best Buy blog, and in this video we look at the Sony ZV-E1, or ZV-E1 if you're in Canada, a full-frame camera that is focused more on vlogging and filmmaking. Well, this is really what the Sony ZV or ZV-E1 is made for. We got a bit of a drizzle here, but the idea is obviously to do stuff like this. So I'm not even using a gimbal here, and it's on intelligent auto, and I've got the steady shot framing also on here too. So as I'm moving around, you'll see that's pretty smooth, all things considered. I've got a 14mm lens on here as well. So you got a very wide angle, which I think is probably what you're going to want to mostly use this camera for, especially for video. But that's, this is just basically right now, this is kind of how you would start out, I think, using a camera like this, especially if you're using it for video. Now it's going to start to come down a little bit here, it looks like, as far as the rain goes, so I'll be back. This is kind of the point of using the ZV-E1. It is a video-centric camera first. Yes, you can take stills with it, and they can be good ones, especially given the image sensor inside. But really, this is made for video, and it's made for video where you're not maybe at the beginner level, but you're more probably intermediate. Sony does have better cameras for video, but this is probably the best mid-range one, I think. Well, I don't know about mid-range because clearly it doesn't cost mid-range, but it's definitely a capable camera, but you're thinking video first and then photos second. The ZV or ZV-E1 uses the same image sensor as the Sony FX3, but more importantly, the A7S III. So if you're familiar with Sony's cameras and you know about sort of the alpha system, you'll know what the A7S III is about, especially if you've used it before. So same image sensor, which is great. And of course, it's using the same E-mount lenses. So if you're using if you have E-mount lenses already, all of them will work. Right now, I've got the 14mm, so this is obviously a very wide, expansive lens, prime lens. I've also used it with the 24 to 70mm G Master 2 lens also, which is great. And I mean, you get really, really great shots. The only thing I would say, though, is that one advantage of using a prime lens is that because they tend to be smaller when you're using the screen. So I'm looking at the screen now because it flips out all the way. I can see more of the screen as opposed to the lens that kind of gets in the way. So that's one thing that if you're using this, especially with a gimbal or you're doing a lot of selfie videos with it, you'll want to keep in mind, because you can only flip the screen out on the one side. You can't flip it up or down or anything like that. Which makes it a little more challenging to see some of the shots you might take. What makes the camera sizable, I think, more so is whatever lens you're going to use with it. So it really depends what kind of gear you're going to have with it, so to speak. The camera, though, is fairly light. The grip isn't bad. So it's a medium size. Actually, I'd say medium size, but it's a smallish body, especially compared to some of the other Sony cameras that are out there. So it's not something that's going to be cumbersome to carry around. But if you are going to shoot with it extensively, you also have to take into account what kind of lenses you're going to put on it and what other attachments you might need. So for example, it might be a microphone, it might be like a boom mic, for example, or it might be like a light, an LED light. It might be anything that you might need to attach. You don't have a viewfinder here, so that's partly what makes this more video-centric, is that there's nothing to peer through here. So if you're going to take photos, you're going to have to look at the screen as well. And the interface and the menu system are largely touch-focused. So you have fewer buttons to press in the back, or pretty much anywhere on the camera, but you have more capabilities as far as when it comes to touch. So if you want to focus on something, you want to go through the menu, you want to make a quick adjustment, it generally happens through the touchscreen. Now, being a full-frame camera, which is always great, you also get a lot of the intelligent features are automatic. So things like, obviously, stabilization, or like I'm doing right now, I haven't set anything manually. So the shutter speed, aperture, all that stuff is being set automatically. It's not what I'm used to doing when it comes to shooting. And again, like if it feels like I'm looking at the screen, it's because I can't help it, because it's right there. The screen's right there, and so I'm trying to look at the lens, so I'm looking at you. But anyways, that's one of those things, I guess, as a vlogger, you always have to pay attention to. Now, I'm in a bit of a louder environment here too as well. So I've got the waterfall here behind me. There's vehicle traffic that is in front of me that you can't see, and there's some activity going on around here. And so I've got a lavalier mic that is attached to a receiver over there that's mounted on the hot shoe, or on the camera itself. So how I'd be coming in, as far as the mic goes, this is what it would sound like if you were using a lavalier. Now, I don't know as far as how it would sound without the lavalier mic.
unfortunately, the microphone, the built-in mic, would pick up too much of the sound. So you'd have to use something like a boom mic, a lavalier. You'd have to use something in order to isolate your audio from everything else that's going on around you, because what happens is the mic just picks up everything. It's not directional necessarily, so it's going to pick up everything that's going on either behind you, around you, or whatever. And so at least the camera does well when you have the right setup, or at least you have the right equipment that's attached to it. One of the intelligent features is an auto framing feature. So in a situation like this, where the camera is stationary, I don't have a camera operator here to help me out, so I have the camera on a tripod, and the idea being that it would kind of emulate, the idea is that it would emulate some camera movement on the part of the camera. It's almost as if somebody was holding it. Now, if I move around, now, one of the things I love about this feature is that you can adjust the crop. So you can have it so that it stops either at a medium level or at a wider level, or when you get closer, so that it's a little bit like I'm doing right now, where I'm moving closer to the camera. It's a really cool feature, and it works very well to sort of simulate camera movement when you don't have the luxury of having that, like to have an extra pair of hands. So it's a pretty good feature, and one that works fairly smoothly as well. As far as moving subjects go, you're going to get some variations there. I think you're going to see some issues with low light shooting situations, but when it comes to a slow moving subject, static situations, static backdrops, things like that, you're going to have some pretty good results. So in this case, I'm not using a gimbal, and I'm just holding the camera on a tripod with carrying some gear too, so I'm not exactly super comfortable. But as you can see here, it's pretty steady. The camera does a pretty good job staying steady, especially if you're using a wider angle lens. So with the 14mm that I've got here, shooting, it's pretty smooth as I'm walking around here, which is always good if you're going handheld in a walkabout or something like that. Obviously, if you want to shoot some action, you're going to go with a gimbal, something that's going to give you that kind of stabilization, something that you can really, really work with. But for walking around, especially if you're just shooting some quick snippets, things like that, the camera is pretty steady that way. And that brings us to footage like this. So I'm using the camera now in more of a stationary position where I'm here, as a talking head. So if you're a content creator, YouTuber, vlogger, whatever it is you want to deem yourself, it is a setup that's fairly easy to do, and it's one that is pretty manageable. I mean, it's really no different. The setup is no different from what I have here from what I did outside. The only difference is, of course, I'm not having any kind of auto framing thing going on here. It's just me talking. Now, I will say there are some caveats here that you have to take into account when it comes to using this camera. Number one, I would say, is the single memory card slot. You may not like that if you prefer to shoot with two slots. So that is a trade-off. It's one of the things that I think Sony had to do, I guess, to make the body what it is. But if it is a bit of a trade-off, especially if you're not used to that. And moreover, I would say also that you have alternatives if you feel that this is too much for what you need. So the ZV or ZV-E10 is actually a step-down model of the ZV-E1. You get a lot of the same features, not all of them, of course, but you get a lot of the same features, a very similar body, and a much cheaper price. So if you're looking to start out and you feel like you don't want to go to something like this right away, that's a really good alternative that you can consider. I'll just summarize and say that I like the camera. I thought that it was fairly easy to use. I'm more of a photographer than I am a video guy, although I do really love video a lot, and I'm always looking for new ways to shoot it. And so the camera did well for that. I like that it's in the Sony system, so it's something that I could adapt to very easily. But even if you're not, even if you're new to Sony's cameras, I don't think you're going to have a very hard time figuring this out. The menu system, which is, look, it's the same case with every Sony camera. It's not the best. It's a little convoluted. Things are just buried in there and you have to find them. But if you're new to Sony's cameras, I wouldn't be afraid of trying this out. But again, as I mentioned, you also have the ZV-E10 or ZV-E10 as an alternative too. And that pretty much sums up my review of the Sony ZV-E1 or ZV-E1. For the Best Buy blog, I'm Teddy K. Thanks for watching.